What's up, everybody? It's been a while since I talked about the big picture of history. I know a lot of you guys have heard most of this, but for the new people, you're going to trip out. But I do have new information I'm adding here, especially concrete evidence of the catastrophe in North America in the 1300s. But this is basically the history we should all learn in school. Once you understand it in this context, it all makes a lot of sense. Simply put, you have the desolation, then the age of discovery and conquest, then the age of development and society building, and then the desolation, rinse and repeat. Now, that whole process is on like a 5 to 7,000 year cycle. The last world age ending destruction was the flood of Noah, flood of Deucalion, epic of Gilgamesh. People all around the world remember the flood. And then prior to that was a destruction by fire in Timaeus, where we get the whole legend of Atlantis from, Plato writes about Solon meeting with the Egyptian priests. O Solon, Solon, you Greeks are always children. There is not such a thing as an old Greek. And on hearing this, Solon asked, what do you mean by saying this? The priest replied, you are young in soul, every one of you, for you possess not a single belief that is ancient and derived from old tradition, nor is your understanding gray with age, and this is the cause. There have been and there will be many and diverse destructions of humankind. The greatest destructions will be by fire and water, and the lesser ones by countless other means. For instance, you have a story about how Phaethon, son of Helios, yoked his father's chariot, and because he was unable to drive it along the course taken by his father, burned up all that was upon the earth, and himself perished by a thunderbolt. That story, as it is told, has the form of a legend. But the truth of it lies in the occurrence of a shifting of the bodies in the heavens which move around the earth, and a destruction of the things on the earth by fierce fire, which recur at long intervals. At such times, all those dwelling on the mountains and in high and dry places suffer destruction more than those who dwell near to rivers or the sea. In our case, the Nile, our savior in many ways, saves us also at such times from this disaster by rising high. When, on the other hand, the gods purge the earth with a flood of waters, all the herdsmen and shepherds that are in the mountains are saved, but those in the cities of your land are swept into the sea by the streams. Yet in our country, either in the past or now, the water does not pour down over our fields from above. On the contrary, it all tends to naturally well up from below. When the Western world rediscovered Egypt just 200 years ago, I mean, that's just a trip to think about. Up until Napoleon went into Egypt, the Western world really didn't know anything about Egypt. Then it was all the rage for everybody who's anybody. And now we date all of Western history based off of what Egyptian dynasty they were trading with. Here you can see the faces on the column are about 6 feet above the guy's head, and this is the full temple. So the ground level was about here when they discovered all of this, and it just explained why. The Nile swells up and floods all of these. It's inland along the Nile, but down at the end of it, at the delta, multiple cities and basically the whole coastline fell off into the Mediterranean. All of that in the yellow there is now underwater. Though I'm not too sure that that's due to flooding alone. All of the surviving accounts say it was a earthquake and liquefaction event and they fell off into the Mediterranean. The island that the famous lighthouse of Alexandria set on was taken out in the same event, and the last of the rubble could still be seen in like the 1400s. So I think this went down in the last world age ending event, and let's talk about that. You have the civilization ending events, last one being Noah's flood, and that's just a wild guess how long these cycles take. From what I've seen in the geological record, it's completely random on the timing. But civilization ending is where you just have a handful of people left. There's Noah and his family as the sole survivors in the Bible. There's Atrahasis, Gilgamesh, Deucalion. Even the Aztec and the Inca had one family that came out of the caves and repopulated the earth. So those are the big civilization ending events. The world age ending event is the Bronze Age, Mycenaean culture. Trojan War. That lasted up till about 1200 BC. Official numbers. We'll talk dating some other time. Then there was the Bronze Age collapse, and they call that era the Greek Dark Ages up until about 800 BC. And that begins the Greek Age. Stories like Jason and the Argonauts even tell about their age of exploration. And we've got the ruins of their age of development all over the place. So then around 200 BC is when all this stuff fell off in the Mediterranean. Then the whole Roman age. And then what they refer to as just 536 AD. But nobody's trying to act like that's a dead on number. Well, some are. And I've read accounts on here where they say it's due to volcanoes. Some say it's due to impact. I just know something happened around that time. The sun was just a pale blue for like 18 months. But floods, drought, earthquakes, volcanoes, impact, famine, plague. And we'll be getting into all kinds of info on that here in a minute. But then you have the Dark Ages, and then you have all of the calamities all over again. Then our modern age of exploration. Here's the really weird thing about the 536 AD event. Afterwards, you have no age of exploration, no age of development, no great rulers come to be. It's a complete vacuum. So I see this as one of two ways. Either the 536 AD event was really bad and everybody was just focused on survival for 400 years, it was so bad, or the 536 AD and 1300s event was the same event. And that might sound really crazy to the new people, but I got a lot of stuff that stacks up that way. And I've even got the WHO lied about it and invented 800 years or so between the fall of the Romans and our modern era, and a couple motives of why they would do that, as well as proof that they're known to forge a bunch of documents. Even the whole AD dating system was invented by Dionysius Exiguus, who's dated at the time of the 536 AD event, but the AD system didn't catch on till the 9th century, particularly under Charlemagne, who I would argue is a fictitious character invented by the Habsburgs to legitimize their rule. And Dionysius Petavius was a 16th century Jesuit theologian and chronologer who just happened to find the work of Dionysius Exiguus, another chronologist from earlier in history. I guess with a name like Dionysius, you're either going to drink a lot of wine or become a chronologer, right? So here they say 200 million, 30 to 50% of the population went extinct, but some accounts say that as many as 15 out of 16 were no more in some of the cities. But they only mention the Black D, which was one of many problems that happened at this time. They say this was in 1348, and then you go back to 1315, and there was the Great Famine, and that was caused by months of incessant rain. And so look at what happened in Texas recently. The water rose 36 feet in an hour. That was one night of absolute downpours. And this happened all across Europe, England, for several months. They say in 1314, but there's hardly any record of what happened, and I think that's intentionally been expunged from the records. One of the very few accounts of this is from Dr. J.F.C. Hecker in 1888, and he was researching the causes of the Black D and says it cannot be advanced beyond generalization without entering upon a field hitherto uncultivated, and to this hour entirely unknown. So he's saying that aside from the Black D, there's a whole field of study here that nobody knows about, a field hitherto uncultivated. Mighty revolutions in the organism of the earth, of which we have credible information, had preceded it. From China to the Atlantic, the foundations of the earth were shaken. Throughout Asia and Europe, the atmosphere was in commotion and endangered by its baneful influence, both vegetable and animal life. According to him, this all started in 1333, 15 years before the plague broke out in Europe, and first appeared in China. So there was drought, which caused a famine. This was followed by such violent torrents of rain in and about Kingsai, at that time the capital of the empire, that, according to tradition, more than 400,000 were swept away. So that's about the population of San Antonio or Philadelphia. And it sounds a lot like the rain event of 1314 that academia acknowledges, but they're about 20 years apart, according to them. Possibly was the same event. Finally, the mountain Shinshu fell in, and vast clefts were formed in the earth. So that's mountain number one that fell in. And then they had a pestilence carry off 5 million people. A few months afterwards, an earthquake followed. Subsequent to the falling in of the mountains of Qi Ming Chan, that's mountain number 2, a whole range of them, a lake was formed of more than 100 leagues in circumference. A league is about 3.5 miles, so a new lake formed of 350 miles circumference. The mountain fell in, made a natural dam, and then the river filled it up with water. According to these dates, this went on for 15 years in China and then hit Europe, or the dating's off. If you've ever heard of comparative history, it's because they compare the two to each other to come up with the dates. There wasn't a unified dating system like we have today where everybody agrees it's 2025. So it makes sense to me that these all happened around the same time. In the same year, great floods occurred in the vicinity of the Rhine and in France, which could not be attributed to rain alone. For everywhere, even on tops of mountains, springs were seen to burst forth, and dry tracts of land were laid underwater in an inexplicable manner. Then mountain number 3 in China fell in, causing a destructive deluge, a tsunami. But springs of water were seen to burst forth even on the tops of mountains. Nowadays, this is pretty well documented after a large seismic event. We've got huge reservoirs of water in the ground, and when things get smashed together and build up pressure, then the water's got to go somewhere. So much water came up that normally dry tracts of land got flooded. This was recorded all over France and Germany, and it mirrors what the Egyptian priests said earlier. They said the Nile rises not so much from rain falling from the sky, but welling up from underneath. This is recorded pretty much all over Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean down into Egypt. On the island of Cyprus, the plague from the east had already broken out when a quake shook the foundations of the island and was accompanied by so frightful a hurricane that the inhabitants who had slain their slaves in order that they might not themselves be subjugated by them fled in dismay in all directions. The sea overflowed, the ships were dashed to pieces on the rocks, and few outlived the terrific event, where this fertile and blooming island was converted into a desert. Here's the island of Cyprus, Eastern Mediterranean, which looks like this today, but they're saying it was a fertile, blooming island up until the 1300s. So this event completely changed climatic zones. Now, we know for a fact that Africa used to be lush and tropical. They call it the African humid period and say that this was 5,000 years ago. But I'm wondering if this didn't all just happen at the same time that Cyprus changed. Then we've got the Fertile Crescent, which today is nothing but desert, but they say this was green back in the Bronze Age. And we've got accounts from this island right here next to it from 700 years ago saying that it used to be lush and now it's a desert. Well, wouldn't it make sense that the whole area changed at the same time? Makes sense to me. Before the quake, a pestiferous wind spread so poisonous an odor that many, being overpowered by it, fell down suddenly and expired in dreadful agonies. This phenomenon is one of the rarest that has ever been observed. So they tell us that everybody expired from the Black D, Yersinia pestis. So you would think that it was just incredibly contagious, right? Well, it hardly ever actually spreads just person to person. I don't think it goes airborne. That's why they say that lice and rats spread it, because something has to inject it into your bloodstream. But when you read into that, you'll hear about this stinking mist that accompanied it. The German accounts say expressly that a thick, stinking mist advanced from the east and spread itself over Italy, and there could be no deception in so palpable a phenomenon. So I've got this pegged as one of two things: either a toxic air that fell down from the sky or came up from the earth. And there's a case to be made for both of them. In thousands of places, chasms were formed, from whence arose noxious vapors, and as at that time, natural occurrences were transformed into miracles. It was reported that a fiery meteor, which descended on the earth far in the east, had destroyed everything within a circumference of more than 100 leagues, infecting the air far and wide. So, one, this fiery meteor came through the air, releasing all of this noxious vapor. Or two, it impacted, causing all kinds of earthquakes, and chasms opened up, and the noxious vapor came up from underneath. Now, I know some people think there's no such thing as meteors because of their idea of the shape of the Earth, but you really got to snug them blinders down really tight to ignore all the evidence of the impact events. This one that hit in the Far East destroyed everything within a circumference of more than 100 leagues. Once again, 350 miles of destruction from the fiery meteor. Get it? And it took me 4 years to find corroborating evidence of this in North America. This is a book just telling the history of the 6 nations up in the northeast of America. And they say 150 years before Columbus discovered America, which, yes, I know all kinds of other people came over. I've done videos on it. But Columbus was 1492 minus 150 is 1342. That is just smack dab right there in the same time frame as all the other reports. About this time, an earthquake was felt throughout the kingdom. It was supposed that a large comet fell into some of the lakes, and other signs were seen in the heavens. Now, he's talking about the Great Lakes. And an earthquake was felt all throughout the Northeast, and they saw all of the atmospheric phenomena and the pretty lights that comes along with these events. It's just 2 sentences on it, but that is a huge find. This just happens to be the exact same area as the Carolina Bays impact event that threw debris all over America. But this was supposed to be in like 10,000 BC or something. So this is the only concrete evidence of this event that I've found, but you can see the effects of it all across America. This is when the Mississippian culture started disappearing from the Mississippi Valley area in America. And out west, this is when the Puebloans and Anasazi all disappeared. Those are the cultures that lived in places like Mesa Verde. Now, I've been out here, and what you don't really tell from the pictures is it's about 100 feet down to the valley floor on your right here. And this is about the biggest pain in the butt place you could possibly live. You got to haul your water, all your food, everything up into your house. And there's easier ways of setting up defensible areas here. What this has, though, is 100 feet of solid rock over their heads. And that's what they were going for. They weren't worried about invaders. They were worrying about things falling on their heads. And historians even agree that they only lived in these places for a relatively short period of time. And the way I see it, this wasn't the main culture at the time. This was the survival society that went way up in the mountains. This is about 5,000 feet up a mountain above the Cortez Valley down below. So this was a major impact event with pieces coming down all around the world, causing quakes and storms and literally changing climatic zones. Back over to Europe, in 1348, one shook Greece, Italy, and the neighboring countries, Naples, Rome, Pisa, Bologna, Padua, Venice, and many other cities suffered considerably. Whole villages were swallowed up. In Corinthia, 30 villages, together with all the churches, were demoed. When the earth ceased to tremble, it was found that mountains had moved from their positions. And I've even found medieval drawings of such things. One of the strange things I haven't found an explanation for is they say that the wine in the casks became turbid and went bad. And I still haven't found a scientific explanation of why that would happen. But there were quakes like nobody had ever seen before at the exact same time as great and extraordinary meteors appeared in many places. So what was it that caused all the quakes? The great and extraordinary meteors that appeared in many places. They'd impact and set off a chain reaction of seismic events, as well as all kinds of aerial phenomena. A pillar of fire, which on the 20th of December, 1348, remained for an hour at sunrise over the Pope's palace in Avignon. A fireball, which in August of the same year was seen at sunset over Paris, and was distinguished from similar phenomena by its longer duration, not to mention other instances that fulfilled prophecies and omens. You know, the Vatican's basement has the most extensive library on astrology and cosmic phenomenon. And since we only have a handful of accounts of this happening in the 1300s, I bet they've got many more down in their basement from countries all around the world. The order of the seasons seemed to be inverted. So, yeah, what happened 700 years ago was much more than a little Yersinia pestis, unless you want to argue that a little bug can move mountains and change temperature zones. And that was just the latest in the never ending cycle of life here. So, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll catch you on the next one. Static out.